prototype design pattern allows you to create objects based on a prototype. And the time you use this design pattern is when your object creation process is very difficult and involved. For example, you might have to call 40 different methods to create a single object, and in that case, your object creation process is difficult. And in that kind of a case, the prototype design pattern says what you should do instead of working on the creating a new object every time you need a new object and calling those 40 different methods is to use a prototype. In other words, you use an object that already exists, a prototypical object, one that already exists and then one that you're satisfied with, and one that has gone through the object creation process and has had those 40 methods already called on it. The idea is to work with a prototypical object. So take an object that is not quite like the one you wanted, but is a prototype for that object. It's very close to it. Then you can clone that object. You go through an object cloning process. You may have a method that clones the object or another object that clones the prototypical object. Or you may have a constructor, a copy constructor that will allow you to copy the prototypical object. Or you may even have a clone method inside the prototypical object. A clone method is different from a prototypical type of copy constructor just because a copy constructor doesn't necessarily do a deep copy, which copies all levels of the object, all its internals, and goes through repeating levels of the internals of the object. So a clone method actually creates a clone of the object. So if you're going to use a prototypical object as a basis of working with a new object, you might want to put in a clone method. So in any case, you go from the prototypical object to the object cloner. Now you've got two copies of the prototypical object. The next step is to customize the new object. So you customize your cloned object and convert it from the prototypical object clone into the object you want to create. You want to customize your new object into the new object. So that saves you the steps of actually having to create the object, a new object over again, and go through the presumably lengthy object creation process. And after that's done, you have the customized object. Okay, so that's the steps, and you use this prototype design pattern if the object creation process is a lengthy one for you, and you start with a prototypical object, you clone it, you customize that object. So all the stuff that's already been supposed to have done in order to create a working object, all those 40 method calls has already been done for you. All you have to do is now customize that object. So you go through the object customization process, you end up with a customized object. And when you're done, you can go on to create another copy of the object. You start with a prototypical object again. You go on to the object cloner and so forth, following all the steps. So that's the idea. You have a prototypical object and you can modify it by cloning it. A prototypical object, you can modify it. First you clone it, so you have two copies of the prototypical object. Then you can customize your new version of the prototypical object. That is the clone of the prototypical object. Customize it into a new object, and that gives you the customized object. So this design pattern is useful when you have a object creation process that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of calls to various methods and so forth. Instead, it says, why not just clone an existing object and customize that clone into a new object, and that obviously is going to save you a lot of time and a useful design pattern for what it's worth, and it's going to save you a lot of effort as well. So that is the prototype design pattern, as you see, and that's a very useful one as well. That's the prototype design pattern.